Right. Well, Adrian has indicated that we should move straight on to the last segment of the day. I'm Clive Cheesman, and have done far less than various other members of the organising committee to bring about today. So I've slightly been riding on everyone's coattails. Now I have to do some work, but it's a very pleasurable job. I have to introduce what we're calling a round table, really, and as you can see, an oblong table with a podium at the end of it. But we hope to instigate a bit of back and forth, a bit of discussion about heraldry in the present day context of the commercial world and in the future. As you can see, we've headed it branding or Blazon, ? The future of heraldry in a world of logos and trademarks. And we'll be looking at questions, is there really any antagonism there, for example, or is there merely the opportunity for cooperative collaboration? Look at the front of your pack today, and you'll see at the bottom of the Visible Identities handout, you'll see the marks, the identifying marks of the four collaborative bodies that have pulled together to bring about today. Only one of them is clearly heraldic, Durham University. The Heraldry Society, of course, is represented by its heraldic badge, but that it doesn't take a specific or necessarily heraldic form, and it could be an expression of a non-heraldic sort. This society, the antiquaries, shamefully unarmigerous, despite the number of heralds who've thronged these halls, as we heard earlier today. It's never had a grant of arms, and so it's represented by its badge, I would call it, its non-heraldic badge, the lamp. And there is the design of the Centre for Visual Arts and Culture at Durham, perhaps a little bit too close to the emblem of the Imperial War Museum for my liking, but it's a good, strong design. So there you have a representative selection of the forms of visual identity that we can encounter in today's academic marketplace, and it's a similar story across other marketplaces as well. One part of this, one jurisdiction where the potential for tension or collaboration between heraldic and non-heraldic symbolism is very much felt is Scotland, where the very proactive role taken by Lord Lyon in policing the use of heraldic or quasi-heraldic visual identity brings his department, Lyon office, into contact with the corporate and commercial sector on a regular basis, much more than we have in England. And potential conflicts between heraldic and non-heraldic or quasi-heraldic or para-heraldic symbolism are confronted regularly, as I say. And our first speaker in this segment is really the person at the forefront of that confrontation. Elizabeth Rhodes joined the Lyon office, the Court of the Lord Lyon, in 1975, and since 1986 has been Lyon Clerk and Keeper of the Records. She's been an Officer of Arms since 1992 herself, and very much an adornment to the not only the efficiency but also the scholarly standing of that institution. She's chairman of the Scottish Records Association and has been involved in, I think it's fair to say, probably every major heraldic event that has taken place in Scotland since her time began at the Lyon office. She's an academician of the Académie Internationale d'Héraldique, and she is here to speak to us now on the subject of heraldry and logos. Can there be a meeting of minds? Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I feel we're slightly moving now from some really very interesting and academic introductions to various aspects of heraldry to what you might call very much the 20th century use. As Clive says, we're very lucky in Scotland in that the use of heraldry is controlled by law, and any misuse of heraldry will bring the attention of the Procurator Fiscal to Lyon Court down hard on your head. And from that aspect, I think that there can be a meeting of the minds, but as a herald, I see it that heraldry goes one way, maybe not the other. Scotland's quite keen on football. Not absolutely sure why, but they are. And the arms on the left are those of Hibernian Football Club, and those on the right of Dundee United. Very recently, a colleague ran heraldic exhibition in Glasgow, and a whole lot of school children were invited in to talk about mythical beasts and to design various things. And of course, all the little boys were only interested in various football clubs, but they had looked at the book they'd been given, and one actually said, were you in any way involved in the design for Dundee United? So it was nice that he picked that up. But how is it used? This doesn't seem to be working. Oh, let's try that. Aha, yeah, that's going to work. As you see, here it is on what I am told is called a strip. You will gather that I'm not terribly knowledgeable about football. And I have two sons who can tell me everything about rugby but couldn't tell me anything about football. And those are the arms at the top used by Dundee United, but now used, as you can see, on their shield. We all know the house flag for P&O. Classic heraldry it is too, although you might not think so immediately. But the colours are reflected in the design of the shield, but omitting the devices that appear symbolic of the Orient. And that, to me, shows that that is good, clear way of adapting heraldry to use it in a modern context, and that is the thrust of what I am going to say. Gleneagles Hotel and Golf Club were very specific in wanting to have a shield of arms which could be adapted out of the shield shape to produce a clear and distinctive logo. And they use the one at the bottom, which you can see, while not exactly the same as either of their recordings of arms, they've recorded twice, is obviously very, very closely derived from it. The whole point to a shield of arms is that you should not need the name of the organisation, as it should become so familiar that you just know what the organisation is. Thus, to a Scot, even I know that the arms on the top left are those of the Scottish Football Association, a lion between 11 thistles. I'm informed there are 11 members of a football team. And this appears on their strips. Girls are now very good at football, I'm told. I think there was a film about Beckham or something that got girls into it. Lloyd's Black Horse, enormously familiar to everybody. Oh, sorry, no, Scottish Caledonian, a long-forgotten airline, but the arms very clearly appear on the tail fin, and to any Scot of a certain age, they wouldn't need to be told that that shield at the bottom left is that of Caledonian Airlines. There's the horse for Lloyd's Bank. Caledonian McBrain is the ferry company on the Western Isles of Scotland and is seen on a very regular basis, several times a day, going up and down the various minches. And there its classic design is used on its funnel. I'm sure none of you need to be told what coat of arms that is. But if you do, and it's a lot better than those psychedelic tail fins they had a go at some years ago. People often think that heraldry has to appear on the classic flat iron shape. And as we heard earlier in Claire Boudreau's talk, that in Canada it appears on circles and all sorts of things. But this is, of course, very far from true. And I spent a lot of time telling people that shields can appear on any shape. Now, Strathclyde University in the top left very specifically said they wanted something that was not a shield shape, because they are actually the university that is found in the centre of Glasgow, Glasgow University being well to the west. And they didn't want in any way for there to be a confusion that somehow their buildings were those of Glasgow University. And you have a naval badge, traditionally shown on a lozenge, ovals, now more and more used for women. The vesica shape, which is derives obviously from the old ecclesiastical seals, but still used. Those are the arms of the Church of Scotland. A roundel. Now that is a classic example of what in Scotland would be regarded as heraldry, because you cannot debruise the saltire, which is a recorded protected badge of Scotland, with anything. And this was rather cunningly designed for the Scottish Golf Union, and it's a golf ball. And the last shield is really a shield within a shield, but is merely just to show that you can use any design and shape that you want. We've become rather fans of W1A, and I feel sorry for the poor people who work in DCMS, who now must every morning be greeted, "Oh, you work for the Department of Culture, Media, and also Sport." But in the last episode, one of the characters said, "Nation shall speak peace unto nation," which of course comes straight from their coat of arms. And I thought, here we are, ridiculing, BBC being brave enough to ridicule their own organisation and quoting from their own coat of arms. Now, for those of us a certain age, they may remember that this was engraved on the glasswork behind the newsreaders. Now you have some terrible swirling red sort of globy sort of thing. But to me, this says what it should be saying, and you shouldn't actually need anything to tell you more than that. Distinctiveness is what is required, not more of the same. I have an anathema when somebody comes to me and presents something in purple. Purple being the colour of today. But of course, in 2 years' time, it'll be the colour of yesterday. And I have to say we spent a long time trying to encourage the Scottish Parliament not to use purple on their badge, but to stick with good old blue. But fashion accessory that they thought they ought to have. Now, I said earlier about no name being needed. We've already actually had Premier League. But if you saw, for instance, this tiger leaping out at you, cougar, or whatever it is, would you have a clue what the organisation was? Does actually the next door neighbour, which is its predecessor with Florida over the top, tell you anything at all? Do we have any idea what Los Angeles Clippers are, although I'm certainly sure they're nothing to do with tall ships? Even Premier League, the old one at least had a football in it. The new one is just a crowned lion. And that, to me, is where logos go wrong. But there are some that are very, very good. They're good and enduring, but even these are not immune to changes and explanation. Pays your money, takes your choice on which colour. And there's also a green one. Shell. Do we need to be told it's shell? We're not idiots, we can see what the shape is. But even that evolves, and then they have to give you an explanation of all the types of designs of shell that they have used over the years. McDonald's, iconic. But even that, you have to have an evolution of the logo. Therefore, my premise is that heraldry, which is always enduring, can provide an enduring logo. With the exception of shell, as an escalope. Could either British Rail or McDonald produce a successful coat of arms? So my premise is that you should be working from the coat of arms to the logo, if need be, or modern symbolism, but the converse is not true. I appreciate that graphic designers need to earn a living, but then so do heralds. On the left, there are 14, dare I say it, exceedingly similar designs, and I could have put up many, many, many more. The one I particularly like is the one that says Made in Britain, which has another incarnation where the arrow is pointing in the other direction. But would you know it was a UK space agency without the words? Or was it actually the British Business Bank? Or is it actually Great Britain Hockey? Or Silverstone? Or whatever the thing. Oh, I think it's the Conservative Party, the tree. So that to me is an idea that somebody had, and it's been run with by lots and lots of other designers who I'm quite sure don't tell their client that actually, if you go and look on the Google, you will find there are many arrows that are based on the Union flag. The other two are absolutely classic, and we have seen both of them in Tim's excellent talk on coin design, where they are used as the symbols for the, in this case, capital cities. But my last slide is, to me, the absolute of whether longevity in a coat of arms is going to go on, or whether in a modern world it will pass and the longevity of the motto will go on. I accept that logos weren't there in 1701, which was the year that the arms of the Bank of Scotland were recorded in the Public Register of all Arms and Bearings in Scotland. The arms still appear, as you can see, bottom of a £10 banknote and on various other things. But the coat of arms is simplicity in itself. And there it is, the logo of the Bank of Scotland, which has been used in that form, to my knowledge, for at least the last 35 or 40 years. Merely take away the outline and you have it perfectly. So from a herald's point of view, I rest my case.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Lots to think on there. I like the question of can you recognise this logo without the name is a recurring question on University Challenge, where it often provokes thoughts. Our next speaker is Dan McCabe, Senior Lecturer in Graphic Design at the University of Portsmouth. And he's going to be telling us about the other side of the equation, in a sense, if it is an equation. He joined the University of Portsmouth in 2010 as a full-time lecturer on the BA Graphic Design course. He has a Master's with distinction in Graphic Design from the London College of Communication and is a Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. He's also a practice-based research active academic. He explores the interrelationship between graphic design and heraldry, and those of us who attended an earlier conference organised by Fiona Robertson in this very building 4 years ago will have had the opportunity to hear Dan give a really quite stimulating presentation, now available online. He offers brand consultancy to external university partners on various innovation and enterprise projects, and I can testify to the fact that he's brimming with ideas on the relationships, both real and potential, between heraldry and modern visual identity. Dan.
So I'm representing graphic design. And we thought that, firstly, thank you for inviting me, a really fantastic opportunity. We thought that it would be useful to underpin this discussion by really giving an overview of the constructs of logo design and briefly explore the context in which we might find them. So I'm afraid there's not much heraldry in this talk, but I'd encourage you as I'm talking about this to really think about those parallels between heraldic design and the world of branding, and I'll certainly touch on that towards the end. And as you can see from this cheery looking chap here, perhaps the oldest examples of what we might consider a logo to be and where we might find it really date back all the way to ancient Egypt. And as I've discussed, the logo is simply one core aspect of what we would refer to as a brand identity. The word brand derives from brander, an Old Norse word, of course meaning to burn, in this case on the backside of an ox. So within the historical canon of graphic design, we do look back to this point to really see where logos came from. Perhaps the first question we might ask, which could be pertinent here, is what is a logo? The answer most people would give would be something like this, and they'd be absolutely right, an abstract symbol. And whether you're a sports fan or not, or whether you're 8 or 80, chances are you'd be able to identify this as the mark belonging to Nike, the sports brand. And the Nike swoosh, as it's called, was designed by a lady called Carolyn Davidson in 1971. And she was a graphic design student at Portland State University. She was paid about $300 for the work, and this has become arguably one of the most recognizable brand logos in the world, certainly one of the most profitable, having a worth of over $26 billion. And Davidson created this logo to convey motion. It also symbolizes the wing of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. And obviously that's from where the company derived its name. So, at its purest form, a logo is a symbol that can be identified as representing something. In this case, a multi-billion-dollar organization. But logos are more complex than that, both in regard to construction and representation. A logo mark or a symbol is often part of a layered system of signs. And the Nike tick is designed to work alone as a graphic device, but it also belongs to a family of other graphic devices. And what we've added here is referred to as a logo type. We also have the necessary registration marks, which indicate that these elements are indeed trademarked. And of course, we can also add what we refer to as a strapline, in this case, just do it. And again, all of these elements can be used individually or as a collective. What we see here is a core construct, and these elements form part of the overall Nike trademark, and that's what we would refer to this collection of assets. And of course, there are points where we start to find that logo, and as designers we refer to these points as touch points. The consumer wears the logo and therefore associates themselves with that brand, and of course the implied cultural value that the Nike brand has. And even in its most minimal form, we can identify that this box potentially contains a pair of Nike trainers. And of course, logos are used to brand environments, as with the Nike store here. We're left in no doubt as to who owns this space and what we can expect to find in there. And the logo becomes something that can be applied not just to products and physical spaces, but also to events and cultural movements. Interestingly, here you can see another logo belonging to Nike that's being developed as part of what we refer to as a brand architecture. And that logo is the Nike Jordan Jumpman logo. And the logo, or certainly a good logo, can be adapted to create narratives and to really showcase the polysemous possibilities of a symbol as it has been here. And as much as brands try to police and protect what their logo represents, it can often be the case where companies come under fire for unethical or unsavoury behaviour. The logo becomes subverted and used to make a critical commentary, as here with Nike and their allegations of using sweatshops in their manufacturing process. And obviously Nike come under a lot of fire and get a lot of heat for their business. But perhaps the holy grail of any brand is to have a celebrity endorse your mark through wearing it. And for Nike, arguably one of their biggest ambassadors is Roger Federer, the tennis player. What's interesting is that even Roger Federer has his own logo, showing that he too is a trademarkable commodity. And for me, this illustrates what many commentators say about modern society, that we are living in a brand era. I have a quote here from a fantastic book called Branded by Gareth Williams. I'd just like to read this. A brand is a combination of names, slogans, logos, product design, advertising, packaging, marketing, that together give particular products or services a physical, recognisable form. So there he's really talking about that brand architecture, all of the various assets that make up a brand identity, the logo being one part of that. Brand is a business strategy to encourage us to consume one product over its competitors, and it's a sign loaded with meaning that we choose to consume because we feel we relate to it. So really, again, good logos, good branding, it endures when it connects, and it takes a long time really for a brand mark to kind of set in, I think, and become really worthwhile. And what we see the logo as doing is really encapsulating what we refer to as the core idea. And the core idea can be considered as the trademark. So the core idea of any brand would encompass things like a name, a logo, colours, type and typefaces, and again that strapline. And if we take a step back and look at that in a broader model, this model is actually adapted from a guy called Wally Ollins. He's a bit of a self-confessed guru of branding, a very famous agency called Wolf Ollins, and this is known as the 4 vectors model. So you can see the core idea manifests itself into what we call a branding system. And again, those elements that Gareth Williams mentioned are there in the centre. It also includes things like the development of the brand architecture, visual systems, and a verbal tone of voice, which we call a look and a feel, which is a bit kind of arty. And the 4 vectors, so this is how a logo gets out into the world, this is how we encounter it. A 1 vector through products, so i.e. what the organisation makes and sells. Another vector would be the environment, so these are the physical spaces in which we encounter the brand, so think Waterstones, Costa Coffee, these wholly branded environments that we walk into. Communication, so how a brand speaks to people, how it communicates to its audience, how it says, how it talks about itself, both internally and externally, and also its behaviour, so how its people behave to each other and the world outside. And what's interesting is that different brands will communicate via differing vectors. Now clearly there isn't just one type of logo, and I think through understanding how logos can be categorised or typologised, we may better appreciate the nuances of form and function, I hope. So I'm going to attempt to do that. So I've got 8 examples here, interestingly there's the McDonald's logo again, to try and give you a sense of how you might start to categorise logos. On one hand, we can look at what we refer to as logo types and letters. So the 4 on the left there, we would consider those as such. And on the right hand side there, we've got what we refer to as logo marks and symbols. Now obviously there's crossover, and I'll try to explain why they are categorised as they are. We can break that down further and differentiate them. The Kodak and MS symbol we would refer to as being word marks and initials, and I think that's pretty clear. The 3 logo from the 3 mobile network and the McDonald's we would refer to as being typographic elements, often standalone elements. On the right hand side we've got the IBM logo and the BP logo, and these we would refer to as being abstract symbols. Now one thing you might be thinking is, why is the IBM logo there and not over there with the word marks? The reason is because Paul Rand, the designer of the IBM logo, who many consider to be the kind of grandfather of corporate identity, so you can blame him, back in the 1980s, what he's doing there through the way he's treating that type, i.e. the sort of the abstract shapes, It's really, he's alluding, he's signifying computing, he's signifying screen design. There's a lot of signifiers that are being attached to that design. Therefore, it's abstract representation, so that's why it's there. And then on the far right, we've got representational symbols, so things like the WWF World Wildlife Fund logo and Heart Radio. And again, there is crossover, but generally speaking, you can start to categorise logos in that way. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the key considerations are that I make when I design a logo. And I think that here we might be able to start to consider, as I often do, some of the similarities between logo design and heraldic design. So again, I'd encourage you also to think about that. One of the first things I really think about is usability. And I always try to consider how a logo is going to be used and the context in which it will be used. And this often requires a need for fluidity and flexibility. And I think a good example of that, whether you like it or dislike it, is the ITV logo. Obviously, they went through a recent rebrand. Now, the reason for that rebrand, and often the reason for a rebrand, these days really is to respond to the multitude of communication platforms that we now have. So for ITV, it's visual, it's screen-based, and this logo responds to any image that's behind it, picking up the colours. So in that sense, it's bold, it's lively, but it's adaptable. And I think, yeah, usability is a key factor in logo design. Ironically, one of my colleagues pointed out that I should have said simplicity here, and for some reason I put complexity, so it's an irony. Simplicity. I think this really is one of the most important things in logo design, and I've heard this kind of talked about a lot today, which is really encouraging. This is one of my favourite logo marks from the Food Writers Guild. So you can see there's a really lovely, clever idea in there. And the reason for simplicity is really about scale. That when you scale a logo, whether it's working at 3mm or on a billboard, it has to retain its detail. And that's why, certainly when I teach branding and logo design, we always get students to start working in black and white first before you even start to think about colour. So again, in the parallels of heraldic design, I think that's probably quite different, maybe. But certainly simplicity is key. Individuality. I agree very much with the need for logos to be unforgettable, but also recognisable as well. And again, it's very important for brands to stand out. So for me, this logo here, the FedEx logo, is a classic in that sense. It's simple, it's bold, it's typographic, but what's really lovely about it is that hidden detail in there, which you may or may not see, which is the arrow that's in the counter space between the E and the X, which of course symbolises Federal Express, the movement, the speed and delivery. So I think, again, logos have that ability, when done correctly, to be surprising and reveal kind of playful things like that. Popularity as well. I mean, I completely agree. Logos can fall foul of trends, and often in design, trends are something we either have to follow or at our peril, because obviously designs will date, or they have to really endure. So, ideally you want to design something that is timeless. You may be aware of this. The Science Museum recently rebranded a couple of weeks ago. The original on the left was by an agency called Johnson Banks, the right by an agency called North. This has come under a lot of criticism as a redesign, because it's felt that the new branding really has lost a lot of the originality and personality that it had. But, of course, designers are quite fickle, as is the design community. Now they've seen the new branding working, and when I mean working, I mean seeing it used and adapted across the many different facets of this organisation. I think there's a much better appreciation of it now, and that it is more adaptable and versatile in that way. So we'll see how that works. And then finally, history. Personally, I think that history can be an incredible resource when designing a logo. As one of my heroes of design, Massimo Vignelli, said, a designer without a sense of history is worth nothing, and I really agree with that. And looking at the historical origins of a company can unearth possibilities to make authentic visual references that are grounded in ideals of heritage and storytelling. But unfortunately, graphic designers can sometimes be lazy or efficient, depending on how you look at it. And rather than looking backwards, we tend to glance sideways. And we can draw from visual conventions that have become synonymous with meaning historical. And I think that might account for a lot of the quasi and para-heraldic work that you see out in modern society. And certainly accounts for the landscape of ways in which heraldry is used within contemporary branding. And so I think that this point should lead us on nicely to discussing the roundtable topic at hand. Thank you for listening.
Well, thanks to both those speakers. We've got just over 20 minutes to kick about some of these ideas, if we're so inclined. And if so inclined, we may also wish to put questions in to some of our earlier speakers and draw them into the discussion too. I'm going to exercise prerogative and start the ball rolling. I mean, I heard nothing in the last in those two presentations to convert me from my previously held view that there is no tension between trademarks, registered or unregistered, and heraldry, and any such tension, including any oppositional statements such as heraldry is much better or heraldry is much worse than logo design, are simply based upon a misunderstanding, possibly even a category error. Coats of arms can be part of a brand. Dan's slide on the component parts of a brand made it quite clear how broad that is as a concept, and logos are merely one element in a brand, and logos too. So they, on that basis, they sit side by side potentially, but there is still surely the opportunity for collaboration. Many logos feature in coats of arms. Many logos include coats of arms, and many coats of arms come to operate as logos. And Elizabeth's example of the Royal Bank of Scotland surely is a case in point. And the more you look at it, the more this supposed distinction dissolves before your eyes. At any rate, that's my proposal. And what I find more intransigent is perhaps merely a cultural difference in the approach taken by heraldry professionals, that most minuscule of professions, on the one hand, and modern designers on the other hand, to questions of the identity of the objects they're working with. In my experience, and this is where all my prejudices are going to come rolling out, modern graphic designers responsible for a logo, or more importantly, the proprietors of a logo, the corporate body whose logo you're looking at, can be very, very precious indeed over how you treat it. The Pantone number of the shade of green that they have selected after many months of committee work has to be respected precisely, whereas from the Herald's point of view, if it's green and you can call it vert, then that's fine, and we don't really care what precise shade of green it is, or the precise positioning or orientation of the motto scroll, the font of the motto. None of this matters two hoots to a herald, but can be an almost life or death issue to the either to the designer or to the corporate body whose logo is involved. So I see cultural differences in the approach taken by the two sectors to what really at root are very similar objects as the main issue here. If there is any tension, it tends to operate over that. And perhaps I'd characterise it by saying that modern designers, as revealed, I think, by Dan's talk, are very much aware of some of the issues. They're professionally aware of some of the issues that Torsten was talking about earlier on. The performativity of the designs that they produce, the reception, the manifold ways that the same design can be received by different audiences or different sectors of the population. is something that heralds are only, speaking personally, only dimly aware of, and perhaps regard as a rather beautiful and joyful aspect of the whole thing. You don't know how your coat of arms, how your design is going to be received, and that's part of the glory of it. It may be received differently by everybody who looks at it. The modern branding professional is deeply aware of this difference in performativity, the different receptions that the same design can receive, and wants to control it, and wants to second guess it or to preempt it by managing, even micromanaging, the way that people respond to the design. I'm going to leave it there because I've said enough. If they're inclined to do so, perhaps our speakers would like to respond, and then it's open to all to contribute.
I think you're absolutely right. There are, of course, logos, and Dan showed us some, that we all know. I think my premise is those organisations that seem to want to reinvent themselves in a completely different way. Perhaps a good example is local councils, who this year are so-and-so gateway to somewhere, and next year are the heart of somewhere else. And yet they probably all have perfectly nice coats of arms that they could put on their boards, maybe with their new gateway to wherever or heart of somewhere else, so that you get that continuity. Now, FedEx is an absolutely perfect example. You've got that continuity in the fact that it's letters and tells us it's FedEx. If it was Nike, you don't need the letters to know and that is good design. That's my argument, is that if it's good design, you shouldn't need the name to tell you what it is. I think there are too many things where rebranding completely and utterly changes, and it takes time. Now, your science museum, if it didn't say science museum, I think it would take time for that to become into the sort of corporate memory of what it is. But no, I mean, obviously there are excellent logos, and it's filling a different part of the identity market. And the identity market is a broad church where you can have both the traditional. I like the idea that at Algonquin University, they use their arms in a very interesting contemporary way as the doors close. I would like them to use it everywhere and not just on their degree certificates. And I think that's the trouble, particularly with universities, is that they only use their coats of arms on things like the degree certificates, the formal bits, and they have something else that brands the university on a day-to-day basis. And I'd like a slightly greater meeting of the minds between the two. But I don't believe it's impossible for there to be a meeting of the minds at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually. I think the universities as an area, I think, is really interesting at the moment. And when we talk about rebranding and rebranding exercises, and I say this as I'm at a university, I have to be careful my VC isn't in the audience. I have to say this as we've just gone through a rebranding exercise. We've also just updated or redesigned our coat of arms, which Clive has been dealing with. I've seen them, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But there does seem to be, at the moment, a bit of a trend or certainly a movement towards universities rebranding. And I think that is, in part, a lot to do with universities as big business and the rise in fees and the students now being positioned as consumers. And so, of course, universities are very conscious about how they're appearing. So what you're finding is that some universities are rebranding and really tapping into their heraldic heritage, and they are actually making moves towards aligning their coats of arms with their kind of corporate identity. You've got other institutions, and actually a lot of those, I think it would be fair to say, are more the kind of Russell Group universities. There are other universities, such as mine, that are really moving away, I think, from those kind of marks of heritage and heraldry and going for a much more dynamic, contemporary style of branding. Now, whatever side of, whatever you think works or doesn't work there, I think that there is some interesting work to be done in looking at what's happening there. And I've heard it said that much of the appeal of heraldry as used as part of a university's kind of corporate branding is its international appeal. And obviously at the moment for universities I think it's really important to have international students in a university. I think what that brings is actually vital. But obviously for universities the fees are much higher for international students. So yeah, there's a lot of international appeal in having the heraldic identity. And I think certainly from our university, when I was part of I got a little bit of a look at the process, and one of the concepts that was tabled did actually acknowledge or reference our coat of arms, and I was really hoping that one would kind of go forward, but it didn't, and we are where we are.
Well, it's interesting that you mention on the one hand, the coat of arms, a set of traditional values that might work well in the international context of attracting foreign students, and on the other hand, a dynamic, forward-looking logo. And some of us might feel that that's a false dichotomy, in the sense that if the coat of arms were merely redrawn by a graphic designer such as yourself, it could tick those boxes as well. And very often what happens is that corporate grantees of arms believe that they are wedded to the specific piece of artwork that they received from the College of Arms or Lyon Court, and that any tinkering with it, and this may be an idea received from modern branding, that it cannot be tinkered with in any way, otherwise you lose the identity of the coat of arms. Whereas of course we are at pains to say, no, take it away. You don't even need to come back to us. Go to an artist of your own choice, reinvent it. As long as you maintain the heraldic substance, it can look radically different and meet your other branding needs and aims. But this is a message we consistently fail to get across.
I think actually Tim's point on the coins is exactly that. You can take elements and use them in a contemporary and modern way that works. I mean, one of the things I always say is, do not look at your book plate in the same way as you look at the stained glass window or the medal that you're going to give at the end of a competition or whatever. Because the way you treat your coat of arms, and the same I'm sure may be true for logos, is quite different. What I think we don't perhaps advocate enough for universities is that they can marry the two by perhaps using the livery colours more for their modern logo design, branding design, and that then provides the link between what's contemporary and young to what's a little more traditional. But that, I fear, is probably where we fail to get the message across.
I think, personally speaking, I think the failure in communication is to a large extent the fault of the representatives of the more arcane system rather than the less arcane system. Let's open it to the floor. Anecdotes, questions, points of order, or information. Stain.
Have you ever come across people who really want a coat of arms but think they're going to get a local? I have an example from the municipal code when they wanted, the municipality has a lake in the centre and they wanted a bird flying over the lake, which is not so easy to do as a coat of arms, but what they ended up with was, in my opinion, a bowl of soup with steam coming out of a spoon. So, how does the artist, the combination of the artist and the image and the commissioner work together?
Well, carefully, I think, on the basis, that sounds like a failure of communication between the three, but Dan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not a heraldic artist. I think, I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but one thing that really strikes me about the process of heraldic design is how close it is to the process of graphic design in many ways. And I think one of the common factors is the client, actually. And I've had a few conversations today with various individuals that are heraldic artists about that. And I think when you are designing something for someone or a panel of people, as is often the case, it's a very difficult process, whether you're a heraldic artist or a graphic designer. And I think that ideally that person would respect the expertise of the artist and the designer and what they know as working, whether it's balance or whether it's about making these ideas work. And I've seen it, from Clive's. I've been very fortunate to see some of Clive's sketchbooks, and Clive's, when I've discussed Clive's involvement in the Olympic coat of arms, and the process that I've seen Clive go through with that, as he's told me, it's really, really complex process, trying to make all these things work, and at the same time please a lot of individuals, which in this case they were from the commercial world, Stella McCartney, Adidas, so these are individuals that really, the heraldry is a very new thing to them as well. So I think it might be fair to say, probably didn't have any appreciation of how heraldry works.
To quote Adidas, Stella McCartney was on a steep learning curve.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, other than I think for me, it's the dealing with the client and trying to please the client, but at the same time retain some kind of integrity in the design. It's very difficult.
It's a very familiar process, I think. So,
one thing I have very rarely seen, and of course it might exist, and would probably be more amusing if it was done with heraldry, would be animation. I welcome comments on this. There's so many animals and things.
You're absolutely right.
But logos couldn't do that.
There is, earlier this year, the University of Salford was granted a revised coat of arms with supporters to celebrate their 50th anniversary. Norroy, King of Arms, who's present here today, presented the university with the grant, and shortly afterwards appeared on their website, and I think it's still up to view, a very clever animation done by their in-house design team of the coat of arms coming together and the support and everything like that. So, but you're absolutely right, there should be more of it. Any comments?
Yes, absolutely. I think, particularly for coats of arms that involve animals. I mean, you did a little bit this morning of, making it come alive by making the animals do things can certainly, I think, help. And maybe I don't know about Portsmouth, but one of the great problems that our artists complain about, and Tim will know about this too, is that heraldic art and calligraphy is no longer taught in art colleges. So they're not learning about it, but they are learning about all these wonderful methods of doing designs of all sorts. I don't just mean logos, but all sorts of things. And they are using computer technology to do this. And if only we could get heraldry back into that, but get them to do moving coats of arms and unicorns and lions fighting around the town or whatever, that might grab some of them to come and learn a bit more. Don't know, do you do that?
Yeah, well, I wish I could, but I'm afraid I'm 2D. Just to echo what's been said here, really, the Salford animation, I was really excited when I saw that, because for the first time, I think as a way of, and I think the university did it really as a way of getting the students and the faculty on side, so here's the coat of arms. And I think a lot of that is to do with a lot of the negative perceptions, and you often hear it said, you're spending all this money on a coat of arms when, and ironically the cost of a coat of arms is a small fraction of a whole university rebrand, which runs into hundreds of thousands of pounds. but I think the way that animation really brought it to life, and particularly in terms of the narratives within the design. And we saw it with Claire as well, with the Algonquin College. There was an animation of that on there as well, wasn't there? Which again really kind of brought it to life. So I think there's a lot of potential actually in that medium, and possibly something that could be explored as a way of bringing heraldry to life. And also just to touch on the point about heraldry in schools, I think interestingly for me, the way heraldry is taught in the UK, anyway, as part of visual communication, is it's brushed over when we talk about branding. It's been my opinion for a few years that I think there is a place really to start talking about heraldry within the historical canon of graphic design. In graphic design, we go back to Gutenberg and movable type, and that's really as far back as we go in terms of design history. And graphic design has a very small history, and it's very baggy and boggy and muddy and saggy and soggy, and it's great. But actually, I think that students can learn a lot from design, from heraldry, about design from heraldry, and I certainly integrate it into my teachings at Portsmouth. And they seem to like it, and a few students really seem to become interested in it. So,
would there were more of you?
Well, like that.
Thank you. I think you're quite right, Clive, that us heraldists has to be better in informing our clients that you can take your coat of arms and have them redesigned by a graphic artist or another artist, because people think that this is a static piece of art. It cannot look any other way than it did in the 1930s when it was granted. But this is the advantage of heraldry, that it can be reproduced, can be redesigned, and it can be redesigned by a graphic artist or anyone else. And the example with the Olympic coat of arms, where you saw both the traditional hand-painted from the grant and then the logo version of it. I think we should see more things like this. I'm the heraldic consultant to the Danish state, and we had a meeting with the Foreign Office and a graphic designer. They used the Danish state arms, and they were doing a new version of it. And instead of taking it from the Blazon, they took the latest version from the 1990s and tried to tweak it and do things with it. I said, well, why don't you just start from scratch? Draw new lines, draw a new crown, draw a new shield shape. Yeah, you can do lots of things with this. And then they said, well, then we will lose continuity. No, you won't. This is 800 years old. The continuity is there. You just have to adapt it to the use you're using for it. So I think there is, as you said, two cultures that we need to get a bit closer to each other. Because some graphic designers will think, oh, heraldry, that's something with a shield, and we have to have a lion and things like this. While others are just doing a logo and putting a shield around it. While others like Dan are actually exploring what is heraldry and what is the relationship between heraldry and logos. I think that can be, I think that's where we need to go if we have to investigate this field further.
I think one of the major problems, and this is something that Ronnie and I have talked over the years, is the registration of the trademark. Because you register, we have a big problem in Scotland, as you can imagine, with Lyon's rampant. And they'll come and say, oh, but no, we can't object to the use of that part of the Royal Arms, because that's not the way your lion is drawn. So I say, well, I'll give you 100 different examples of the lion rampant in the Scottish coat of arms, and they'll all be equal. But no, if it's not the absolute way, the converse is that then we have a problem actually getting them to prevent companies from using the Royal Arms. Because they'll say, oh, but you see, they've left off the clause. So it's no longer a part of the Royal Arms. Because trademarks are the design that the IPO is given.
It's a very different approach to type identity.
It's a very, very difficult thing. I suspect this is part of the problem of people thinking it's got to be done that way because they've recorded it with the IPO. and therefore they can't deviate. And it's a different argument, but it's one that affects both, obviously, all forms of branding.
Claire, maybe just.
I just feel to talk about numbers. If you take England, how many heralds could create coats of arms, and in Scotland and in Canada, we're just a bunch of professionals. And if people want granted heraldry, well, they have to come to us. They cannot go really on the private sector. Even every country have bogus heraldry and heraldry shop that sells
Well, it's
cups.
Scotland that we shop.
Oh, we all have them.
We can put them in jail.
In Canada we do not, and they're just in our face. But the truth is, if you talk about number, the graphic designers are many, and they're the private sector, and it's a free world, isn't it? And for heraldry in many countries, you have to apply. There's this notion that heraldry is an honor, and we're in Canada. The program is in the Canadian honor system, and that adds to the complexity. But if you take just the numbers of heralds, we know what to do. We know that heraldry is flexible. We explain it. We're telling it. We're praying that after receiving a grant, they will hire our colleagues to do good stuff. But our job is done. We have no time to go on the graphic, the next step, which is, let's get the goodies done. Let's put the coat of arms on the cause. Let's put whatever. It's not the heralds that will do it, let's face it. Not because we don't want to, but we don't work to do these things. So I'm asking the question. It's not a war between the two, but there's a disbalance of who's doing it. The heralds on one side is paid by the state, who represent the government, and then the free world to get your package, the branding package.
My great cry, whenever I hand over a document to anyone, is get it off the vellum. Get it into use. However you use it, put it on your tie, Richmond's tie. Put it on this, put it on a poster, your mats. If you're lucky like I am and your husband thinks what you've always wanted for your birthday is 2 20-foot high flagpoles, you have to spend a lot of money having flags made for your children. But get it off the paper, and that is where the graphic people can show us how we can do it better.
I think it's very nearly time to wind up. Time for just one last brief question, if we may.
I might have missed a trick here, but what we're saying is that Nike is a corporation which is represented by an official symbol, which is a tick.
Yep.
BBC is a corporation represented by a symbol, which is rather an elaborate coat of arms. Why is the Nike tick not heraldry?
Well, I think that's the nub of the question, or indeed that dissolves the question nicely in the way that I suggested it should be dissolved. So yes, I think that's a very valid point. It's not on a shield would be the traditional answer, but I think from Claire's talk onwards today, the whole day perhaps has taught us that such rigid dichotomies are false and just awaiting dissolution. So a very good point on which to end. Thank you very much.